Hello. The research doctor is here again to treat you. In science, any observed happening, or event, occurring in the environment is essentially the observed phenomenon. However, the mechanisms that are underlying it are generally unknown, and hence we use research to investigate them thoroughly. After a phenomenon is observed, two approaches can be followed. We can either do inductive reasoning or deductive reasoning. Let's first talk about the deductive reasoning. The deductive reasoning includes the proposition of hypothesis, and the verification of the hypothesized principles by making observations, thus confirming or rejecting them. Deductive reasoning was first proposed by Aristotle during the 4th century. He proposed that you start with a major premise, then go to other minor premises, and then all these premises lead you to a certain conclusion after following a logical scientific process. Aristotle explained by giving this example. Premise 1, all men are mortal. Premise 2, Socrates is a man. And the conclusion is Socrates is mortal. Let me give you another example. Premise 1, hard-working students excel in exam. Premise 2, Ali is a hard-working student. Conclusion, Ali will excel in exams. Let's have a look at the process of deductive reasoning. The researcher starts by selecting an area of interest. He then selects an existing theory to form the basis of starting his research. That's in one way or the other, called the research problem. Based on the existing theory, hypothesis is formulated. The researchers then makes relevant observations, and collect relevant data to test the hypothesis. Data is subjected to analysis, and the results are obtained. According to the obtained results, and the derived conclusion, the hypothesis is either rejected or accepted. In other words, the theory is either confirmed or invalidated. In the final stage, the conclusion is derived based on the hypothesis status. Let's understand it better using a simple example. In this example we have selected an area of interest which is the living organisms. An existing theory from this area of interest is selected which is all living organisms are made of cells. Based on this existing theory, a hypothesis is formulated. Elephant is made of cells. Next step is to study elephant in complete detail, and collect data to check whether elephant is actually made of cells or not. According to the obtained results, and the derived conclusions, the hypothesis is accepted. The elephants are actually made of cells. And now we reach the final stage by concluding that elephant is a living organism. Now, we will have a look at an example of deductive approach paper in literature. It is a study done by Ryan Kings, on the topic, Contemporary Hate Crimes, Law Enforcement, and the Legacy of Racial Violence. The article uses deductive methodologies to study how police officers respond to hate crimes cases in America. Researcher developed a hypothesis, which suggested that the response of the police officers would not be as vigorous in parts of the nation with stronger violence of racism. The researchers tested the hypothesis by analyzing the histories of data of the states with hate crimes responses and lynching hate crime responses. Now let's talk about the inductive reasoning. The inductive reasoning includes analyzing an observed phenomenon, and identifying the general principles, structures and the trends in it. The end result being the development of a generalized theory. Inductive reasoning was first proposed by Sir Francis Bacon, a 17th-century natural philosopher, 2,000 years after Aristotle proposed the deductive method. In 1620, he proposed in his publication Novum Organum, New Method, that by making repeated observations, we can perfectly generalize the repeatedly observed phenomenon into a probable conclusion. The more data you have, greater is the probability of the conclusions to be true. Let's change Aristotle's example to understand inductive reasoning. We make repeated observations and see that Plato is a mortal man, Socrates is a mortal man, and Avicenna is also a mortal man. So we reach a general conclusion that all men are mortal. From making specific observations, we have reached a general principle. Taking another example, Earth is a planet that revolves around the Sun, Venus is a planet that revolves around the Sun, and Mars is also a planet that revolves around the Sun. Therefore, all planets revolve around the Sun, which is a general principle. Let's have a look at the process of inductive reasoning. The researcher starts by selecting an area of interest. He then creates a research problem from the selected field or the area of interest. Research question is then developed, which will be the basis of the research. The researcher will tend to answer it through the research process, and reach conclusions. He later on gathers data by making relevant repeated observations. When the required number, or substantial amount of observations are made, they are subjected to analysis. During that stage, the pattern in the observations is searched, meaning, how the data behaves. Then in the final stage, a theory is developed using the data, and the identified patterns. Let's understand by using a simple example. We use the area of interest. Living organisms. The research problem that we want to investigate is the structure of the living organisms. Then, we devise a research question, which is, what are the living organisms made of? We will direct our research process towards answering this question. Now we're gathering data to answer our research question, and the data we have gathered is that the rat is a living organism, and is made of cells. We make more and more observations and see that elephant is a living organism, and is made of cells. In the same way, butterflies, cyanobacteria, and parrots are all living organisms, and are made of cells. Thus, we have found out a pattern in our observations. And we can finally conclude that all living organisms are made of cells, and in this way we have developed a generalized theory starting from specific observations. An example of inductive research is an article published in the Child and Adolescent Social Work Journal. The topic of the paper is Enhancing Empowerment and Leadership Among Homeless Youth in Agency and Community Settings, a Grounded Theory Approach. In this article, the researchers used analyzed data to understand the hardships homeless people went through. In this study, the researchers used data collected from 20 young people with no home or place to shelter. Researches can also be done by combining both inductive and deductive reasoning. They start with inductive reasoning followed by deductive reasoning, and vice versa. An example from literature is an article named, A Method Combining Deductive and Inductive Principles to Define Work-Related Digital Media Literacy Competences. This paper combines deductive and inductive approaches to analyze interviews and observations carried out in 10 organizations. Now let's have a look at the differences between deductive reasoning and inductive reasoning. There is a difference in approaches of the two types. Deductive reasoning moves from broad generalizations to specific observations. It uses general principles to infer specific propositions. In contrast, inductive reasoning moves from specific observations to broad generalizations. It uses specific propositions to infer general principles. Inductive and deductive reasoning processes have to be viewed as reversals. Deductive reasoning uses a top-down approach, whereas inductive reasoning uses a bottom-up approach. When we look at the direction of the two approaches, the researchers do not alter the direction of study in deductive reasoning, because it starts with a hypothesis. Whereas in inductive reasoning, the researcher can freely alter the direction of study as there is no hypothesis involved. The proposition of hypothesis is the most crucial step of deductive reasoning. Making relevant and repeated observations is the most crucial step of inductive reasoning. Deductive reasoning is mostly used in quantitative research that deals with numbers to bring out causality and present statistical analysis. Inductive reasoning is mostly used in qualitative research that aims at finding rich descriptive data. Deductive reasoning focuses mainly on testing hypothesis. Inductive reasoning mainly focuses on answering the research questions. There is a difference in the use of observations. In deductive reasoning, the researcher uses observations with the intention of validating the pattern. In inductive reasoning, researcher attempts to find patterns through observations. Deductive reasoning is appropriate for large sample researches. Inductive reasoning is appropriate for small sample researches. Both types have their own limitations. In deductive reasoning, conclusions are necessarily true if the premises are true. In inductive reasoning, the conclusions are only ever probabilistic. They are never certain. They can never be proven, but can be invalidated. The researches involving deductive reasoning are highly structured, as there are specific aims to achieve. The researches involving inductive reasoning are less structured because no guiding factor is present. Deductive reasoning aims at testing or verifying an existing theory, and to arrive at certain conclusions. Inductive reasoning aims at developing or building a theory. In deductive reasoning, verification and validation of explanation is achieved, giving no new knowledge. In inductive reasoning, there is discovery of new knowledge and explanations. That's all about inductive reasoning and deductive reasoning. Have any questions? Ask away in the comments section. Subscribe to the channel. Like and share the video with your folks. Goodbye.